What are some of the dark events in history that people do not know about? Let's have a look. A beard closet. In the early 80s, Bayer knowingly sold millions of dollars worth of HIV and hepatitis tainted medications to Asia and Latin America. What? Holy moly, that's so crazy. These countries didn't have laws to prevent the proliferation of tainted drugs. Thousands of people died as a result. Oh my, what? It was hardly mentioned on any news platforms. Wow. During Prohibition, the government funded and led an operation to release barrels of alcohol that they had poisoned to make people sick and shy away from bootleg liquor. Oh my god. Lots of people ended up dying, but people still drank more than ever. That doesn't sound good. The Halifax Explosion, regarded by many as the biggest man-made explosion prior to the invention of the atomic bomb. A ship laden with explosives collided with another vessel in Halifax Harbour. The resulting explosion flattened much of the city's downtown core, killing roughly 2,000 and injuring 9,000. Whoa, didn't know that. The blast is said to have temporarily displaced the water in the harbour, forming a tsunami that reached up to 15 meters high, surging over the wreckage of the waterfront. Wow. The following day, Halifax was hit by a blizzard that dumped 40 centimeters of snow on top of the city, further complicating rescue efforts. The city is also home to a cemetery where many victims of the Titanic were laid to rest. What? It is said that the body identification system developed at the time of the Titanic sinking in 1912 aided efforts to identify victims of the Halifax explosion in 1917. What? Crazy. The San Francisco plague of 1900 to 1904 was a terrible, scary time when the Black Plague was beginning to ravage San Francisco. California's governor tried to suppress information about the outbreak and restrict any activities to curtail it because he feared economic damage to the state. He even tried to get the doctor who was warning people about the outbreak fired. What information did get out was used against the Chinese residents, as it was believed that it was a disease of the unclean. Had it not been for the earthquake in 1906 that devastated the city, the plague outbreak would have probably been more remembered. There's a surprising amount of people that don't know about the Rwanda Genocide that happened pretty recently, like when Bill Clinton was president. Basically, there were two types of Rwanda natives, the Hutus and the Tutsis. The Hutus believed the Tutsis, I don't know how to pronounce that, were invaders of land that was theirs, and after the assassination of the Rwandan leader, who was a Hutu, the Hutus were ordered to chop down the tall trees, which meant kill the Tutsis. I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm hoping I'm getting it right. The differences between Hutus and Tutsis were that the Hutus were supposedly darker skinned, shorter in stature, and had shorter faces. That's why the Tutsis were called tall trees. The events that followed killed so many Tutsis, yet the UN was stingy to call it a genocide. They never liked using that term because of its association with World War II and the Nazis. It wasn't until very recently that the killings stopped. What? To this day, Hutus and Tutsis that survived the genocide speak at events side by side, speaking about how terrible the events were. That's crazy. In my family's region in Africa, they used to carry out the death penalty by snakebite. Just a snakebite to each ankle, and then letting the man spend his remaining time with his family before he died, under supervision. I thought it sounded sort of humane in a way, like our lethal injections, but apparently they say it was one of the most horrific ways that existed. That's mental. The sad case of Otto Bongo. He was a pygmy boy from the Congo who was essentially captured and brought to the USA to be displayed in freak shows. He had undergone tribal customs such as having his teeth filed into points before his capture. Oh, that's horrible. He eventually got out of the carnivals and dreamed of returning to Africa. Then World War I happened, making the trip impossible for the foreseeable future. He committed suicide by gunshot. Sad. The VIP Holm Experiment. Sweden are mostly known as a not very scary country with good and mostly accessible dental care. Well, part of how that came to be is this. There's a link there you can check out. Hey, you are institutionalized and suffering and powerless. Let's make your teeth rot out of your skull for science. What? Crikey. I'm not sure how dark it is, but most people don't know how bad the pillory punishment actually was. Apparently, my great-grandfather was pilloried for adultery back in the day, and my grandfather once told me what he'd heard about how bad it was. Delaware didn't abolish the pillory until 1905. Most people think they just threw tomatoes or maybe bricks/rocks to kill the person. Probably varies by location, but from what I've heard, this was very rare and would get you pilloried, so hard to say, or worse, yourself. It wasn't meant to be a death sentence. In practice, it wasn't deadly at all, but horrifyingly gross. Especially in the late years, right before it was abolished, crowds had become rather sophisticated about making it as bad as possible. What I heard happen to my great-grandfather in his 1-hour sentence was they started by pelting him with rotten eggs. Often a few dozen would be available. Only then do they start pelting you with cow/horse manure, dead animal guts, and even dog poop. The idea is that the rotten eggs make you really sticky, so then everything else sticks better. Oh, that's awful. Crikey, or the chicken poop prison in Thailand. Used by French forces to hold political prisoners, rebellious Thai people, in the Chantaburi region. The long-standing impacts of this much-feared torture are still felt in the region today. There's a Thai saying for those who buck authority that roughly translates to, be careful not to get caught in a chicken poop prison. I learned about this prison from my parents, who learned about it from theirs. How it worked was there was a small 2-story prison. Bottom floor houses the prisoners, and the top floor is basically a huge chicken coop. What? The grated floor/ceiling ensures that the chicken poop falls onto the prisoners below. Oh my. What? That is so messed up. No. Apparently, even though the maximum sentence in Crikey was around a week, it was one of the most feared punishments there was. Oh. That is not good, that one. The Radium Girls. In the 1920s, they worked at a watch company painting the hours on the watches using radium, a radioactive element that glows in the dark. They did this with no PPE and weren't told radium is dangerous. Meanwhile, the chemists had full PPE and worked in a sealed environment. Worse, they were instructed to lick the tip of the brush to make a very fine point. Oh wow, that doesn't sound good. Some of them would paint their nails or their teeth with it for fun when they went out at night. Oh no, crikey. They would develop cancer whenever the paint touched, and many of them had such decay in their jaws that their mandibles had to be held on with bandages. Holy moly, that's awful. Edit, apparently there's a new movie about this, as many Redditors have helpfully pointed out. Here we go. The Massacre of Kalavrita is a village in Greece. The Germans entered it and rounded up all the male villagers in a field. They then shot them all with machine guns. After that, they got the children and women and put them in a church. When everyone was inside, they locked the doors and set fire to the church. Oh my god. Horrendous. Around 20 minutes into the burning, a German soldier couldn't take it anymore and opened the doors. Around half of the people escaped the fire, but the rest perished. The German soldier was shot for this, and if you go to Calavrita today, his name is on the memorial. No one was punished for this apart from the leader of the division, who I was told by my grandmother that he died in a gulag. But everyone else got away with it. It is sad that no one knows about this, as things like this happened all over Greece and Russia and Poland. I only know about this because my great grandmother was one who escaped in the church. Oh my. Wow, history is a scary place. This massacre was in retaliation for the villagers supporting the local resistance force, which had recently killed about 10 Nazis. In the 1920s, the Osage Indians, Oklahoma, USA, discovered one of the largest oil fields on Earth. They went from being poor to being the richest civilization on Earth overnight. Whoa. Imagine Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates and Elon Musk living on the same street. The Osage were building mansions, hiring servants, driving exotic cars, and the women were marrying white men as trophy husbands. It wasn't long before people started moving into town and exploiting them. Slowly, one by one, they began being murdered. By the end, hundreds had died. The men were hiring people to kill their wives. Whoa. Lawyers were drawing contracts to transfer oil rights and tricking the Osage into signing them. It was so crazy that it led to the birth of the FBI. This was one of their original investigations and is still largely unsolved. Martin Scorsese is currently writing/directing a movie about it. It's going to be based on the book Killers of the Flower Moon, which is where I learned about it. Super interesting read. Margaret Beaufort, mother of Henry VII, father of Henry VIII. She was married off at age 12, to Edmund, 25, who was desperate to get her pregnant as quickly as he could. Whoa, oh my god. It was not unusual for members of the aristocracy to marry young. It was slightly more unusual because of the risk to both mother and child for them to get pregnant before the age of 14. Edmund died of plague while Margaret was pregnant. She was widowed and alone and pregnant during war. Oh my, that's absolutely crazy. The birth was a very difficult one and would scar her forever. For a time they believed that she and her unborn child would perish. Not only was she very young, but she was also slight of stature and undeveloped for her age. So it's a wonder she even survived childbirth. Crikey. It was so difficult for her that she never became pregnant again over the rest of her years, despite remarrying 2 more times. It is widely believed that she was physically damaged during the childbirth and was unable to conceive again. But it's also possible she was too traumatized to ever put herself in that situation again. Crazy, crazy, scary world. So messed up. Either way, Margaret devoted herself to her son, calling him my dearest and only desired joy in this world. Mental. Girls in the poorest regions of the world today are often married off too young and become pregnant. While trying to give birth through underdeveloped bodies, they may develop fistulas, basically a hole between their anus or bladder and her vagina. This causes her to uncontrollably leak feces or urine. What usually happens is this woman, girl really, is then discarded by her husband and dumped somewhere. Oh my god. The world's a scary place sometimes. There are women who spent literal decades half crippled, begging on the side of the road because of untreated fistulas. A simple surgery can correct the fistula and restore her life to her, but it is usually out of the financial reach of these girls. Whenever I get a few extra bucks, I donate it to the Fistula Foundation. There's a link. Awesome. Oh, crikey, this has been a heavy video so far. Magdalene Asylums, also known as the Magdalene Laundries, places of reform for women that didn't fit the idea of a good, upstanding citizen. The most well-known ones were in Ireland. The women and the girls were abused and mistreated by asylum staff, most of whom were nuns. Here's the Wikipedia article, more sources at the bottom of the page. ETA, thank you to everyone adding on with more horror stories about this place. Mass graves, selling these women's children to people in other countries, blocking any parental rights. Crazy. There's apparently at least one movie coming out, a lot of stories about it, and so many people sharing stories from their mothers and grandmothers. I guess it's more well known than I first thought. Use of the Judas Cradle for torture. The Judas Cradle was a pyramid-shaped seat set up high where the victim would be seated on the pinnacle while tied. Oh my. What? Oh god, that's awful. The pyramid point would penetrate the victim's anus or vagina, and the sheer weight and movement of the person would slowly, oh my god, help it penetrate more. That's absolutely horrendous. The torturer would sometimes add weight to the victim's legs, rock them, or add oil to the pyramid to increase the pain and quicken death. Oh my god, that is absolutely horrendous. My god. Well, Stealthy Bastard. Croatia's Ustasha's sick radical. An Ustasha that isn't able to take out a baby from its mother's womb with a blade isn't a good Ustasha. Anti-Pavlik. Some of their most horrific crimes were burning babies in front of their parents, mangling kids from 0 to 14 years old with axes, raping girls in front of their mothers, cutting off the ears and noses of their prisoners whilst being alive. Oh my god. History, savage, horrible place. Even the Nazis were horrified by these guys' methods. Highland clearances. Thousands of Scots were forcibly evicted from their homes. Many were forcibly exported to Canada, the US or Australia. Many who refused were massacred, with whole villages of women and children raped. Many died of starvation on the forced marches or from famine, all so they could farm sheep. Crikey. If you're interested in more morbid historical anecdotes and facts, I highly recommend Reddit thread The Gritty Past for that type of content. One that really stands out to me from the sub is this image of the Filipino zoo girl that was on display in the Coney Island Zoo in 1914. She was bound by ropes and people tossed peanuts at her. Crikey. It's just heartbreaking to see something like that happen, especially to a child so young. Many people have no idea that human zoos existed, but they are definitely a dark part of history. I agree. Whoa. What's crazy is that there have still been some that have popped up in the 21st century, although not as cruel as they used to be. Crikey. The January 1945 sinking of the MV Wilhelm Gustloff. It was a German ship carrying fleeing Germans from the Eastern Front to the west through the Baltic Sea. It was sunk by the Soviet Navy shortly after setting sail. The total death toll is unknown, but estimated at over 9,000 since there were so many stowaways. Crikey. It is the worst maritime disaster ever. Several times more than the Titanic. It didn't get nearly the press because they were the enemy, so who cares? And the Nazi media certainly didn't report it because they're at the waning days of a war. They're badly losing, so the last thing they need is more hits to their already sinking morale. Oh, that's a horrible pun to include there. The Cambodian Genocide. You could have been killed just for wearing glasses. Therefore, being an intellectual, at least this was the Khmer Rouge logic. The prisoners were tortured so badly that they tried to commit suicide in every way possible. even by using some spoons. The executions used to be like this. The prisoners were put on a straight line, and to the second prisoner was given an object like a shovel or a hammer, which he had to use to kill the prisoner in front of him. What? Then the same object was given to the third prisoners, and the cycle would repeat until there was nobody alive except for the last prisoner on the line, who was then killed by the guards. So crazy. I've actually been to this place in Cambodia. Scary, scary, scary place. Since many medics were killed or sent to work as farmers, the local regime used child medics to conduct experiments on the prisoners. They used teenagers with no knowledge of Western medicine to experiment on people without anesthesia. Crikey. For example, they opened one person's chest just to see his heart beating. In my honest opinion, this shit is even worse than the Unit 731. Oh, it's awful. Explosive frog. Mother and baby homes here in Ireland. Most Irish people will know about this, but most people from other countries don't. Basically, mother and baby homes or laundries were places run by nuns where women would be sent if they got pregnant before marriage, and would do all the laundry from people who sent their dirty clothes to the homes until they gave birth. During childbirth, they would be provided with no real medical procedure, anesthesia, etc. And the nuns would often verbally abuse them during the process for being so sinful as to have sex before marriage. When the baby was born, the umbilical cord was cut, and that was the last contact the mother would have with the baby ever. Whoa. The nuns would only ever rarely let the baby live, and if they did, it would be abused by the nuns its whole childhood for being the product of sin. But most of the babies didn't survive, and you would think maybe they would be killed humanely. Nope, dropped into a septic tank. Oh my god. So awful. They've all been shut down now, obviously, but they ran until the late 70s, I believe. During excavations, they would find the remains of around 300 newborn babies for each home. I apologise if any of this is a little inaccurate. I will gladly correct myself if I've got something wrong. Oh, this has been such a heavy video, crikey. You know Jameson Whiskey? Well, a long ass time ago in the 19th, one of their family hairs fed a little girl to cannibals. Like legit went and bought a little girl in the Congo as a slave and brought her up to a cannibal tribe because he wanted to see them. Sick Buck drew pictures of it and shit as it was happening. Oh my god. Of course, for years the family tried to bury the facts and the stories and such, discredit the witnesses, but the crazy bastard was happy to document the whole thing. His only rebuttal in case it reflected badly on him was that he wanted to see if they would do it, and his accounts matched up with the evidence witnesses had provided. Crikey. Edit. Really lads, 2 wholesome awards. You didn't think a cute puppy or kitten deserved those accolades more? The hell is wrong with you people? The sinking of the Sultana, which occurred in 1865, legally allowed to carry 375 people. It was carrying over 2,300 recently released Union POWs, civilians and crew when the boiler exploded. Oh wow. About 1,800 people died from steam burns and drowning. Wow. Why so many people? Greed. The US government would pay $2.75 per enlisted man and $8 per officer to any steamboat captain who would take a group north. Whoa. So the captain took on more and more passengers. Plus, the men were desperate to get home as the war had finally ended. Crikey. The Sultana explosion occurred the same month the war ended and Lincoln was assassinated, so it was barely a blip in the news. Everyone thinks of Chernobyl when they think of major industrial disasters in the modern era, but the disaster at Bhopal was 2 years prior to Chernobyl and much, much worse, many times worse. If you want to go into a deep dive on how this happened, well, There's Your Problem has an excellent 2-part podcast on the engineering failures behind it and the true extent of the aftermath. The rape of Nanking some of the things I have read have made me physically sick. Oh god. Oh, it's just been a big video, this one. Not many people outside of Canada know about the abusive residential schools many Indigenous kids were forced to go to up until the 90s. But even less know that they were also experimented on in the quest to cure tuberculosis. Truly sick stuff. The Tlatelolco Massacre, a little known mass shooting in Mexico City, where the Mexican armed forces fired upon unarmed civilians that were protesting the 1968 Olympics that would be held in Mexico City. Undetermined number of dead, around in the hundreds, and around 1,200 arrested. Crikey. The story of Hisashi Ouchi and the Tokimura incident. He was an employee at the Tokimura nuclear plant where there was a disaster which led to him being exposed to nearly twice what is considered deadly in terms of gamma radiation, 17 SV for reference. At the plant, the workers were limited to 50 MSV of exposure yearly. So Ouchi got 340 years worth of safe exposure over the course of a few minutes. The levels have also been compared to what may have been present at the epicenter of the Hiroshima explosion. Crikey. Ouchi was kept alive against his will for 83 days. He was just a shell of flesh and bone and completely lucid for about the first week, enduring pain and suffering most of us could never imagine. He asked doctors to let him die and they didn't. They just prolonged his suffering, and now we know what happens to the body when exposed to extreme levels of radiation. Oh, it's awful. Your organs literally melt, your skin falls off, and it's worse than any horror movie. Oh, and this was in 1999, and the order for nearby residents and businesses to evacuate wasn't sent out for nearly 12 hours. Oh my, that's so recent, that's crazy. Child marriage in America isn't talked about as much as it should be. What's worse is that it's still a thing. Oh no. Have you heard of Terre? He was born with a stupidly rare eating disorder and basically ate everything he found to get his hands on, including a cadaver, and finally hit rock bottom when he ate a baby whole. Oh my god. Last slide. None of my American history classes in high school taught the 1921 Tulsa Massacre. I legit didn't know about it until I saw a comment on Reddit. The Armenian Genocide wasn't even that long ago either.